2 backpacks abandoned at the campsite. 2 pairs of hiking boots left in the dirt. No sisters. They were supposed to be home by Sunday night, but by Monday morning, they were gone. Detective Jerry flipped through the missing person reports, cross-referencing notes and photos, until one detail stood out, something the initial search had missed. When he traced their path into the dense Mount Iron woods, the forest revealed a secret that left investigators stunned and made the sisters' survival almost unbelievable. How could 2 women who had vanished for months be found alive, unconscious, and tied to a tree in the middle of the wilderness? The morning of September 13th was cool and overcast in southwestern Idaho. Ordinary early fall weather that gave no warning of what was coming. At 8:25 a.m., a blue Toyota Corolla pulled into the Puma Rock trailhead. 2 sisters, Nina and Sarah, stepped out wearing hiking boots, rain jackets, and daypack backpacks. To the parking attendant, they looked relaxed, focused, prepared. Nothing about them suggested danger. If you were standing there that morning, would you have sensed that this hike would never end? They signed the visitor log at the information kiosk, a 2-day loop along the lower Puma Rock Trail, smaller connector paths, several backcountry campsites. Their handwriting was steady, no hesitation, no fear. Later, investigators would return to those signatures again and again, because they looked like the handwriting of people who fully expected to come home. According to their mother, Elizabeth Blake, Nina and Sarah planned to camp near Hush Creek, a quiet stretch of forest where the trail narrows and the tree cover thickens. It was rarely visited, even during peak season, perfect for experienced hikers seeking isolation, and the sisters were careful. Extra food, first aid kit, even a satellite emergency device for worst-case scenarios. So if they were this prepared, why was that device never used? That evening, at 7:40 p.m., Elizabeth received a short text from Sarah. They had reached their campsite. The weather was holding. Everything sounded normal. Cell tower records later confirmed it. That message was the final verified communication from either sister. No emergency signal followed, no late-night call, no second update. After that message, the forest didn't just fall quiet, it swallowed everything. The untouched satellite device will later become one of the most disturbing contradictions in this entire case. By the next morning, the silence had already turned into panic, and the first search didn't begin in the forest. It began in the parking lot where their car still sat exactly where they left it. If you have watched this far, thank you. Kindly write in the comment section where you are watching from and the time, 'cause some mind-chilling discoveries are coming your way soon. By Sunday night, the silence was no longer peaceful. It was loud enough to scare their mother. By 9 p.m., Elizabeth expected Nina and Sarah home. When no one arrived, she sent text after text, none delivered. She called both phones again and again. Every call went straight to voicemail. At first, she tried to stay calm. Cell service in the Mount Iron region was unreliable. Hikers lost signal all the time. But how long would you wait before silence stopped feeling normal? By Monday morning, neither sister reported to work. That's when concern turned into fear. Nina was a graphic designer at a Utah marketing firm. Sarah taught kindergarten at a local elementary school. Both were known for being dependable. Both had confirmed obligations that morning. Neither had taken time off. By 7:30 a.m., Elizabeth was inside the Ada County Sheriff's Office filing a missing persons report with shaking hands. What began as a late return had now become an official disappearance. The case was assigned to Deputy Lawrence Jerry, a veteran with over 20 years in search and rescue. As Jerry reviewed the timeline, one detail immediately stood out: the satellite emergency device. It had never been activated. If they were lost, injured, or afraid, why was there no distress signal? To Jerry, the silence from that device suggested only 2 possibilities. Either the sisters never believed they were in danger, or something had stopped them from calling for help. That same untouched satellite device, first noted at the trailhead, was now officially logged as the most troubling contradiction in the case. The search launched at first light on September 14th. Rangers, K-9 units, and volunteer rescuers gathered at the Puma Rock trailhead. The plan was direct: retrace the sisters' intended route and reach their Hush Creek campsite as fast as possible. Everyone expected to find something by the end of the first day. The skies were clear enough for helicopter support, but the forest's thick, dense canopy severely limited visibility of the ground across most of the area, composed primarily of Douglas fir, western hemlock, and red cedar. With an understory of ferns, salal, and vine maple, the ground was only clearly visible from above in clearings, riverbanks, and rocky outcroppings. If something was hidden under that canopy, how could anyone possibly see it? Less than 2 hours into the search, the first unexpected finding would force the entire operation to slow down. And it wasn't found near Hush Creek at all. It was discovered closer to where the sisters should have been seen. By midday, the forest gave them a campsite, but not the people who built it. The ground teams moved slowly and methodically along the trail, scanning for anything that proved Nina and Sarah had passed through: footprints, broken branches, a disposed wrapper, anything. By midday, they reached the area near Hush Creek where the sisters were believed to have camped. They found a clearing. There was a fire ring with charred wood, flattened earth where a tent could have stood, small impressions in the dirt that matched hiking boots. The scene clearly showed recent human presence. So where was everything that should have been there? There was no tent, no backpacks, no sleeping bags, no supplies. The campsite existed, but the sisters had vanished from it. Forensic teams later confirmed the fire ring had been used within the past few days, but the wood was cold and soaked. No recent flames, no warmth left behind. The search expanded outward in a grid. Volunteers pushed through dense undergrowth, calling out both names again and again. The K-9 units picked up a scent trail leading away from the clearing. For the first time, the forest gave them a direction, but the trail faded after a few hundred yards, near a rocky slope where the terrain became steep and unstable. After that, nothing, just bare stone and silence. If the dogs lost the scent here, did the sisters leave the ground another way? Over the following days, the search widened dramatically. Adjacent trails, creek beds, abandoned logging roads, divers entered slower sections of the Puma Rock. Every possibility was chased. Nothing surfaced. No clothing, no equipment, not even a torn scrap of fabric. By the end of the first week, more than 100 volunteers had joined the search. News crews arrived. The case spread fast. The Blake family pleaded publicly for answers. Photos of Nina and Sarah were posted across towns, ranger stations, and campgrounds. The same description echoed everywhere: experienced hikers, careful planners, not reckless. So how do two cautious adults vanish without leaving even a single item behind? Most people scroll past stories like this and forget. But not you. You felt something. Don't just watch, subscribe, before the next secret disappears. On September 21st, 8 days after the sisters were last seen, the active search was officially scaled back. The sheriff's office explained that without new information, large deployments could not continue. The family was devastated. Deputy Jerry promised the investigation would remain open. And still, the satellite emergency device, the one tool meant to break the silence, had never sent a signal. Weeks passed. Then months. The case file stayed on Jerry's desk. No new leads arrived. No witnesses came forward. The blue Toyota Corolla remained parked at the trailhead, untouched. When it was finally examined again, everything inside looked normal: personal items, spare clothes, a cooler with melted ice, a road map with the trail route highlighted in yellow. It all pointed to a planned return that never happened. Every object said they meant to come back. So what changed between the campsite and the silence? 3 months later, Winter would uncover the first detail investigators had missed, and it wouldn't be found near Hush Creek. It would be discovered far deeper than anyone expected the sisters to go. The forest didn't just hide answers. It began to erase them. As October slid into November, the land itself started to change. Leaves burned gold and red, then fell away. Temperatures dropped. Light snow dusted the higher elevations. The Blake family refused to stop searching. Weekend after weekend, they organized their own expeditions with friends and volunteers. Flyers went up across towns. A social media page tracked every lead, every rumor, every hope. How long would you keep searching a place that keeps giving you nothing back? Outdoor groups were contacted. Hiking clubs were called. Rangers were questioned again and again. But the forest gave no response. It was as if Nina and Sarah had dissolved into the trees, leaving only absence behind. 3 months passed. Winter sealed the Mount Iron National Forest under deep snow. Trails vanished. Cold took over everything. By December, temperatures dropped below freezing almost daily. The search didn't just go cold in leads. It went cold in reality. The sheriff's office kept the case technically active, but with no sightings and no evidence. All large efforts were forced to wait for spring. Hope was now on pause, not gone but buried under ice. Deputy Jerry reviewed the file again and again. Every time it ended the same way. Timelines, maps, and silence. Elizabeth Blake moved in the opposite direction. She coordinated with missing persons groups, hired private investigators, took calls from psychics, posted updates weekly, refusing to let the story die online. At what point does hope become the only thing left to hold on to? At Sarah's school, children taped drawings and handwritten cards to the front office wall. Each one was a small wish for her return. Nina's co-workers held a candlelight vigil in downtown Utah. Cameras showed up. The story lived on. Not because answers existed, but because letting it fade felt unbearable. As December turned into January, optimism began to fracture. Survival in the winter wilderness was almost impossible. Hypothermia, starvation, exposure, predators. The danger stacked higher with every passing week. How long could anyone survive out there without shelter, food, or rescue? Some volunteers quietly stopped coming. Friends began slipping into past tense. No one said it out loud, but the belief started to settle in. The gradual withdrawal of some volunteers from the search meetings, coupled with family friends beginning to refer to the sisters in the past tense, confirmed the grim reality. The unspoken agreement was that Nina and Sarah were lost, and the only hope remaining was that the forest would yield their remains when spring arrived. Just when everyone believed the forest would only return bodies, it revealed something alive. On the morning of December 17th, a wildlife biologist named Heskey Gaze was moving through a remote section of the Mount Iron National Forest, tracking elk migration far off established trails. This was terrain few people ever entered. He carried GPS equipment, a telephoto camera, and several days of supplies. According to his report, he was nearly 5 miles northeast of the Puma Rock Trail when he noticed something that didn't belong. What would you think if you saw 2 human shapes standing motionless deep in a place no one should be? At first, Gaze thought he was looking at mannequins. 2 figures stood upright against a massive Douglas fir, still, slumped, silent. For a moment, he even assumed it was some kind of strange art installation or a cruel prank. Then he stepped closer, and the forest's illusion collapsed. They weren't mannequins. They were human. 2 women were bound tightly to the tree with thick nylon rope. Their arms were pulled behind their backs and wrapped around the trunk. Their legs were tied at the ankles and knees, locking them in place. Their heads hung forward, their hair was matted, their clothing was torn, soaked with grime, and barely recognizable as hiking gear. Their skin was pale, chapped, and raw from the cold. Who ties 2 living people to a tree and leaves them there? Gaze froze. His heart began to race, as disbelief gave way to terror. Then training took over. He pulled out his satellite phone and called emergency services. His voice shook, but his words were clear. He gave GPS coordinates, described the bindings, and said the words dispatch would later repeat in stunned silence. The women appeared to be alive, but unresponsive. The dispatcher ordered him to approach carefully and check for vital signs. Without touching the ropes, Gaze stepped forward. His hands trembled as he reached for the neck of the nearest woman. He felt a pulse, weak, uneven, but present. He checked the second woman. Another pulse, against every law of nature. Both women were still alive. They had been missing for 3 months. It was the dead of winter. That morning's temperature hovered just above freezing. Nights dropped far below. There was no fire, no shelter, no visible food, no water, and yet they were breathing. How does anyone survive like that for even one night, let alone 3 months? And still the satellite emergency device, the one meant to save them, had never sent a single signal. Gaze staggered back, overwhelmed by what he'd just confirmed. The forest hadn't returned their remains. It had returned a living impossibility. But when rescue teams arrived and cut the ropes, they realized survival had come at a cost no one was prepared to hear. Because once the sisters could finally speak, the truth of what happened in the forest was far worse than disappearance. Some people ignore warning signs until it's too late. Don't let your loved ones be the next cautionary tale. Download the Family Survival Guide today. Check the comments section. Emergency response was immediate. A helicopter lifted from the nearest ranger station. Ground teams pushed through snow and underbrush toward Heskey Gaze's GPS coordinates. The terrain fought every step, but the signal was precise. When first responders broke through the trees, the scene stopped them cold. The 2 women were still tied upright to the Douglas fir, unmoving, their bodies slack, their clothing shredded. Exposed skin was layered with bruises, scratches, clusters of insect bites. Their hair was tangled with leaves, mud, debris. Their hands and feet were swollen and darkened. Circulation cut off by the tight bindings. How long would it take for the human body to reach that state while still alive? Paramedic Jennifer Whitmore would later say they looked like survivors of a war. Their faces were hollow, eyes sunken, lips split and bleeding from dehydration. But the detail that haunted her most wasn't their injuries. It was their posture. Even unconscious, both women were still standing upright, suspended only by rope, as if someone had deliberately positioned them that way and left them. They hadn't just been tied to the tree, they had been displayed. The medical team moved instantly. Vital signs were checked. 4 fluids pushed into collapsing veins. Knives cut through nylon rope. As the bindings fell away, both bodies collapsed forward into the arms of the responders. Stretchers were deployed. Within minutes, the sisters were airborne. They were rushed to Legacy Salmon Creek Medical Center in Boise, Idaho, where a trauma team was already assembled. What condition do you expect after 3 months missing in winter wilderness? The first medical assessment stunned even veteran doctors. Nina and Sarah were severely dehydrated, critically malnourished, hypothermic. Their core body temperatures hovered just above the threshold where organs begin to fail. Each had lost an estimated 30 to 40 pounds. Muscle mass had wasted away. Their skin showed prolonged exposure damage. But the most disturbing injuries weren't from the cold. The ropes had left signatures the body could not hide. Deep ligature marks ringed their wrists, ankles, and torsos. The impressions matched the thickness and pattern of nylon rope. Pressure sores had formed where circulation had been cut off the longest. Skin breakdown suggested the bindings hadn't been loosened in days, possibly weeks. Who restrains someone that long and keeps them alive? And still, through all of this, the satellite emergency device had never been activated, not once. Doctors stabilized their temperatures. Fluids continued to flow. Machines monitored every fragile heartbeat. For the first time in 3 months, Nina and Sarah were warm, fed, and safe, but safe did not mean free from what waited next. Because once the sisters began to wake up, investigators realized their ordeal wasn't over. The truth was just beginning, and the first words either of them would speak would immediately shift this case from a rescue to a manhunt. Against all odds, the sisters were alive, but survival was only the beginning of the mystery. Even in their battered, malnourished state, Nina and Sarah had endured 3 months of cold, starvation, and restraint. Doctors were stunned. One later remarked that human bodies are resilient, but not this resilient. By all medical logic, they should have been dead, yet they were alive. How does someone survive what should have killed them months ago? News of their discovery spread like wildfire. Local and national media reported the Blake sisters had been found alive in the remote Mount Iron National Forest. Headlines screamed about their miraculous survival and the strange circumstances of their rescue. Questions erupted instantly. Who had tied them to the tree? Why leave them in such a remote spot? How had they survived without food, water, or shelter? And most unnerving, why were they still unconscious when found? The Ada County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate criminal investigation. Deputy Lawrence Jerry, already the lead investigator on the missing persons case, now coordinated a full-scale probe. This was no longer just a search and rescue. It was a potential abduction, assault, and attempted murder case. The forest that had swallowed them now became a crime scene. Forensic teams arrived to document every detail. Photographers captured the tree, the ropes, and the surrounding terrain. Ropes were collected for lab analysis. Soil samples were taken. Snow footprints were measured and photographed. Every piece of evidence was cataloged and preserved. One discovery stood out: a set of boot prints leading away from the tree. Distinct treads suggested work or hiking boots. They led northeast, deeper into the forest, before vanishing into a rocky, unyielding section of terrain. The prints could not be followed further. Whoever left them moved with precision, leaving no trace beyond that point. Who can tie someone for months, leave them to die, and then vanish without a trace? And still the satellite emergency device, the one that could have alerted authorities months earlier, remained unused, silent as ever. The forest had given up the sisters alive, but it had also revealed its first real clue to the perpetrator's identity, and the investigation was about to uncover a trail that would force Jerry and his team into parts of the forest no one dared enter alone. Survival was only the beginning. The truth waited in their own words, but they couldn't speak yet. The investigation into the Blake sisters' 3-month ordeal began as soon as the crime scene was secured. Deputy Lawrence Jerry coordinated forensic teams, medical personnel, and Forest Service officials to reconstruct the timeline. But the most vital witnesses, Nina and Sarah themselves, remained unavailable. Both women were still unconscious, their bodies battling extreme trauma. How do you extract a story from someone who can't even open their eyes? Doctors at Legacy Salmon Creek Medical Center worked nonstop to stabilize them. Recovery from the brink of death is slow and delicate. Medical reports detailed their condition: severe dehydration, malnutrition, hypothermia, and profound physical and psychological shock. Vital signs were weak but stable. 4 fluids rehydrated fragile veins. Warming blankets gently raised core temperatures. Blood tests revealed alarmingly low electrolytes, proteins, and vitamins, their bodies literally consuming muscle to survive. Every heartbeat was a defiance of nature. The restraint injuries were a grim focus. Ligature marks on wrists and ankles were deep, discolored, and in some spots infected. Medical teams treated wounds with antibiotics and specialized dressings. But the evidence told a clear story. The bindings had been in place for weeks, possibly the entire ordeal. Pressure sores on backs and sides suggested the sisters had been forced to remain standing, or semi-standing, unable to rest or lie down. Could anyone survive that kind of torture for weeks? Upright, restrained, with no relief. Trauma nurse Paul Becker later testified he had never witnessed anything like it. The fact that they survived it at all, he said, is nothing short of a miracle. And all this time, the silent satellite device, the one that could have alerted rescuers immediately, remained untouched. But once Nina and Sarah began to awaken, their first words would shatter every assumption the investigators had made, because the sisters remembered details, small, precise, impossible details, that would turn the search for survival into a hunt for the person responsible. After 3 months of silence, the first words would break the case wide open. On December 20th, the third day after their rescue, Sarah Blake began showing signs of life. Her eyelids fluttered, fingers twitched. Medical staff immediately notified Deputy Jerry, who had been waiting at the hospital for any chance, to speak with the sisters. Doctors warned him she wasn't ready. Brain function was fragile. Questioning too early could cause further harm. Jerry stayed close, ready for the moment the doctors allowed it. What would you say if the first words you heard after 3 months of silence hinted at danger still lurking? 2 days later, December 22nd, Sarah fully regained consciousness. She opened her eyes, looked around, and began to cry. Nurses comforted her, explaining she was safe and that her sister was nearby. Her first words, barely a whisper, were, "Where is he?" Just 3 words, and the investigation changed instantly. The question sent a chill through the room. Nurses tried to clarify, but Sarah became agitated. Her heart rate spiked. A mild sedative calmed her, and she drifted into a light sleep. But the idea was clear. There was a he. Someone had done this, and he was still out there. The following day, Nina regained consciousness. Her awakening was quieter but no less emotional. She stared at the ceiling, then slowly noticed the nurses beside her. Tears ran down her face. When asked how she felt, she only nodded and whispered that she was thirsty. Once told Sarah was alive and in the next room, Nina closed her eyes and sobbed. After everything they endured, who would you most want to hear about first? The person responsible or your sister? On December 24th, 7 days after their rescue, both sisters were deemed stable enough for interviews. Deputy Jerry and Detective Laura Grimshaw entered Sarah's room first. A counselor was present, as both women were considered vulnerable witnesses. The interview was recorded and entered into the official case file. Sarah sat up in bed, arms wrapped in bandages, face pale and drawn. Fear and exhaustion showed in her eyes. Jerry began gently, asking her to describe what she remembered from the day they went missing. And finally, the sisters' memories could fill the gap that the silent satellite device never had. What Sarah remembered would reveal a level of planning, cruelty, and deception far beyond what anyone had imagined. And the first name she spoke would point investigators toward the man who had kept them captive for months. The first memory revealed the nightmare that had haunted the sisters for months. Sarah spoke slowly, voice barely above a whisper. She described September 13th evening near Hush Creek. Camp was set up as planned. They cooked dinner over a small stove, talked about their week, and watched the sunset through the trees. Everything seemed normal. They went to sleep around 10 p.m., zipped inside their tent, with no inkling anything was wrong. How quickly can a perfect evening turn into terror? Sarah's hands trembled as she continued. In the middle of the night, she awoke to the sound of the tent zipper being pulled open. At first, she thought Nina was getting up. But Nina remained beside her. Before they could react, a bright flashlight beam blinded them. A man's voice, calm, quiet, told them not to scream. She could not see his face, only a silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, holding something in his other hand that looked like a knife. The forest had gone from refuge to trap. He ordered them out of the tent slowly. Terrified, they obeyed. Zip ties were used to bind their hands behind their backs. The man moved with efficiency, practiced, emotionless. His instructions were simple. Do not run, do not scream, do not look at me. Then he forced them to walk. Sarah could not measure the distance. It felt like at least an hour, maybe longer, through roots and rocks while he followed closely. Could you keep moving through the forest, bound, with a stranger following silently? At one point, Nina whispered a question. What did he want? The reply was chilling. Not angry, not frustrated, just blank, emotionless, uncaring. Finally, they reached a clearing. There was a makeshift camp, a tarp stretched between trees, a pile of supplies, and a large backpack. The man made them sit as he prepared more restraints. This time, nylon rope was used, the same type later found binding them to the tree, ankles, knees, torso, secured to nearby trees, immobilized completely. The ropes, the standing posture, the precise bindings. Everything Sarah described matched exactly what paramedics and forensic teams found months later. The forest had hidden them for 3 months, but it had also preserved every cruel detail of their abduction. And now, every instruction he gave, every movement he made, was about to guide Jerry toward understanding who had done this. The nightmare wasn't just abduction. It was a slow, deliberate torment. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted the days that followed. The man did not assault them physically, no beating, no sexual assault, but he kept them tied day after day. He gave only enough water to survive, occasional pieces of dried fruit or crackers, never enough to satisfy hunger. Words were rare, always commands. Stay quiet, stop struggling. How would you endure months of pain, hunger, and fear with no explanation? Sarah and Nina tried reasoning, asking why he was doing this. He never answered. He stared blankly, treating them as objects, not humans. Days blurred into weeks. The man moved them twice, deeper into the forest, choosing locations carefully to avoid discovery. He checked the ropes, tightening them when necessary. They were rarely allowed to sit or lie down. Most of the time, they had to remain standing, leaning against trees for support. Pain was constant. Muscles cramped, joints ached, skin chafed and bled. They begged for rest. He refused. Survival, yes. Comfort, never. It was a torture designed to break body and spirit, yet he kept them alive. Weeks passed. Hope faded. Talking became too exhausting. Struggling was pointless. They simply existed, waiting. And then the man moved them one final time, to the tree where they would be found. The ropes were wrapped tighter than ever, cutting into skin, constricting breathing, and then he left. Sarah had no sense of how long he was gone. Hours, days. Time no longer existed. She remembered growing weaker, vision blurring, thoughts slipping away. She remembered Nina whispering, "I love you," and then blackness. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the hospital. Could you survive being held captive in silence, stripped of time, hope, and comfort for months? Every detail she described, the tightening ropes, the controlled suffering, the final tree, matched what rescuers and medics later documented. And though she survived, Sarah knew something terrifying. He had planned everything with precision, and he might still be out there. Because now that the sisters could speak, Jerry finally had the key to track the man responsible. But following it would lead into the darkest, most hidden corners of the forest. The man wasn't just cruel. He was calculating, almost inhuman. Deputy Jerry listened to Sarah's account in silence, face grim. When she finished, he asked her to describe him. Sarah closed her eyes, searching her memory. White, likely 40 seconds or 50 seconds. Thick beard, dark streaked with gray. Heavy jacket, cargo pants, work boots. Voice deep, flat, no discernible accent. But the detail that haunted her most, his eyes, cold, empty, like he wasn't fully there. Could you ever forget a stare that stripped away your very sense of safety? Nina's account, recorded the next day, mirrored her sister's testimony almost exactly. The same abduction, same night, same methodical cruelty. But she added critical details. The man knew the forest intimately, moving through darkness without hesitation. No map, no GPS, never losing his way. Years in the forest seemed evident. He was invisible in plain sight, yet left terror in his wake. He carried almost nothing, one large backpack, a small waist pack, no vehicle. Self-sufficient, surviving off the land with skills resembling military or extensive wilderness training. Nina tried memorizing landmarks in the early days, hoping to guide rescuers if they escaped. But he seemed aware. Every few days he moved them deeper into the forest, farther from trails, brushing away tracks, breaking branches, choosing rock or hard ground to erase evidence. How do you survive someone who always stays 3 steps ahead, even in the wilderness? One moment stayed with Nina. Second week, she guessed, though unsure of exact timing. Ropes tightened around her wrists, pain so sharp she couldn't stop crying. She asked him why. What did he want? He paused, looked at her with those empty eyes, and said, "I just wanted to see how long you would last." The words turned fear into something darker, terror without reason. Nina realized then this was no ransom, no revenge, no rational motive. They were test subjects, observed, studied, like lab rats. And the worst part? There was no humanity to appeal to. He did not see them as human. Every detail, the precise bindings, the constant relocation, the methodical cruelty, now made sense in the context of what paramedics and investigators had seen. The sisters had survived the impossible, but now Jerry faced a chilling truth. The man's knowledge, skill, and cold detachment made him far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And to catch him, they would need to think like him, anticipate someone who considered humans nothing more than experiments in the forest. Every day was a test of endurance and of their will to survive. Over the following days, the sisters provided more fragments of their ordeal. They described the man's routine, checking on them twice daily, early morning and late evening. Water was sparse, a few sips, sometimes half a cup. Food was minimal, dried fruit, crackers, once a piece of jerky, just enough to survive, never enough to ease hunger. No fire, no cooking, no trace left behind. He was a ghost in the forest. How do you stay alive when even the basics are controlled by someone else? Sarah recalled hearing distant voices, hikers, search parties, even a helicopter overhead. Each time they tried to call for help, the man gagged them with strips of cloth. He would stand still, silent, until the sounds faded, then remove the gag as if nothing had happened. Psychological torment was constant. The man rarely spoke, but when he did, it was to remind them of their helplessness. He claimed no one was looking for them, that their family had given up, the search had ended. They had been forgotten. As days became weeks and months, doubt began creeping in. Maybe he was right. Maybe no one was coming. Despair became as sharp a weapon as the ropes themselves. Physical deterioration was relentless. Muscles weakened. Skin broke out in sores. Hair fell in clumps. Menstruation stopped. Teeth loosened. They felt themselves dying bit by bit. There was no sudden collapse, only a slow, agonizing fade. Then, in what they believed were their final days, he changed his method. He brought them to the large Douglas fir tree, tying them differently. Ropes were tighter, multiple loops around arms, legs, and torsos, immobilized completely. He stepped back, looked at them, and walked away. That was the last time they saw him. Could you imagine being left in total helplessness, every motion impossible, completely at the mercy of someone who saw you as less than human? This final binding, the tree, the ropes, the standing position, matched exactly what first responders and forensic teams had documented. And though the sisters survived, the chilling reality remained. The man had vanished, leaving no trace, yet the forest still held every secret of his cruelty. Now, Jerry and the investigators had to reconstruct not just the abduction, but the mind of a man who could orchestrate months of suffering with surgical precision. The forest had kept its secret for months. Now the question was who had the skill, the cruelty, and the knowledge to vanish without a trace. Na remembered thinking this was it. Death was imminent. Her vision went dark, thoughts scattered, then nothing. The next moment she woke in a hospital bed. What would it feel like to drift between life and death, powerless to stop it? The sisters' testimonies gave investigators a chilling timeline, but also urgent questions. Who was this man? Where was he now? Why had he abandoned them instead of finishing what he started? Deputy Jerry formed a task force, detectives from Ada County Sheriff's Office, FBI violent crimes agents, and forensic specialists from Idaho State Patrol. The case was classified as aggravated kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. Federal involvement meant more resources, more expertise, but also a sense of urgency. The first priority: identify the suspect. Physical details from the sisters were used to create a composite sketch. Both Na and Sarah worked with a forensic artist separately. The images were consistent: white male, 40 to 55, heavy build, thick dark beard streaked with gray, deep-set eyes, approximately 6 feet tall, sun-damaged complexion, clearly someone who spent extensive time outdoors. A man who could survive the wild and terrorize with precision. The sketch was circulated across the Pacific Northwest. Law enforcement, social media, local and national news. Tips poured in, but most led nowhere. Vague sightings or individuals with solid alibis. Then a lead surfaced. Retired Forest Ranger Donald Keir called after seeing the sketch on the evening news. He recognized the man, or at least believed he did. Over the years, Keir had seen someone who lived off the grid, moving through Mount Iron like he owned it. A survivalist, avoiding contact, resenting hikers. He remembered the man's dark green or gray pickup truck, and that he had once mentioned living near the Cedar Creek drainage. The descriptions matched everything the sisters had said: the knowledge of the forest, the self-sufficiency, the careful avoidance of others. For Jerry and his team, the puzzle was only beginning. Find the man before he disappeared again into the wilderness and into darkness. Because now the investigation had a lead, and every step closer would reveal just how dangerous and meticulous their suspect really was. The forest had hidden him for months, but every clue left a trail, if you knew where to look. Investigators acted on the lead from retired Ranger Donald Keir. Vehicle registration records were scoured, cross-referencing the composite sketch with anyone in the area who had prior law enforcement contact, trespassing, poaching, or public land violations. Within days, a name emerged: Victor Kane, 57. Sparse, but telling criminal history. Illegal camping, trespassing, hunting out of season. No permanent address. Last known location: rural route near Nampa, Idaho, 25 miles south of where the sisters were found. Vehicle matched Keir's account: dark blue Toyota Tacoma, Idaho plates. Could someone with no address, no social media, and no fixed routine really be tracked down? Kane's physical appearance matched the composite sketch almost perfectly. License photo: heavy beard, deep-set eyes, hardened expression. Height 6 feet 1 inch, 230 lbs. Jerry immediately put him at the top of the suspect list. Background check revealed military service. U.S. Army, early 1990s, field reconnaissance. Honorably discharged, but with disciplinary marks for insubordination and failing protocol. Post-military, sporadic construction and logging work. After 2010, he vanished from records, living transiently in southern Idaho forests. A survivalist, trained in the field and invisible to the modern world. The perfect predator in the wilderness. Investigators obtained warrants for any property or vehicles tied to Kane. The problem finding him: he had no phone, no email, no social media, no utility bills. Kane existed almost entirely off the grid. The search honed in on Carson. Deputies canvassed rural roads, showing his photo to residents. Recognition came slowly. One woman remembered him parking his truck at a dirt turnout near the Cedar Creek, hiking for weeks at a time. A gas station attendant recalled selling him fuel and supplies months earlier, but couldn't recall exactly when. Every detail, the truck, the trails, the forest expertise, matched the Blake sisters' descriptions of their captor. Victor Kane was out there, somewhere in the wilderness. And every day that passed increased the danger of him vanishing again, leaving no trace of the months-long nightmare he had orchestrated. Now, Jerry and his team had a name, but catching a man who could disappear into the forest, as if it were his home, would test every skill they had. And then some, a sighting on Christmas Eve, the trail of a ghost in the snow, finally pointed the investigators in the right direction. On December 26, a break came from an unexpected source. Amanda Briggs, a postal worker on rural routes near Carson, called the tip line after seeing Victor Kane's photograph on the news. She reported seeing a man matching his description just 2 days earlier, December 24th. He had been walking along Forest Road 31, a remote gravel road leading deep into the backcountry. Briggs remembered him clearly. Unusual to see anyone on foot in winter. He carried a large backpack, wore heavy outdoor clothing, and waved her off without making eye contact. Deputy Jerry immediately organized a search operation focused on Forest Road 31 and the surrounding wilderness. Deputies, Forest Service officers, and FBI agents assembled at the trailhead on the morning of December 27th. The area was remote, heavily forested, and blanketed in snow. Could they track a man who knew the forest better than anyone, hiding in plain sight? Temperatures were well below freezing, and the thick canopy limited visibility. The team moved cautiously, aware Kane would have the advantage in his own terrain. Search dogs tracked faint scents while a drone equipped with thermal imaging scanned for heat signatures. The ground team followed faint tracks in the snow leading into dense old-growth forest. After hours of careful tracking, they discovered a campsite hidden beneath a rocky overhang. The site was well concealed, surrounded by thick brush, nearly invisible from more than a few yards away. Everything matched the sisters' descriptions: meticulous concealment, knowledge of the forest, and self-sufficiency. At the site, a small tarp stretched between two trees. A sleeping bag laid on pine needles. A circle of stones used as a fire pit. Personal items included a metal cooking pot, water filtration system, several cans of food, a large hunting knife in a leather sheath, and a backpack matching the postal worker's description. Victor Kane had left signs of life here, but was he still nearby, watching the searchers, ready to vanish again? The team prepared to move in, knowing that any misstep could mean losing him forever. A camera, a timestamp, and a trail in the snow. The forest had kept its secrets, but not for much longer. Inside Victor Kane's backpack, investigators discovered additional supplies. Maps of Mount Iron National Forest with certain areas penciled in, and a small digital camera. The camera, an older model typical of hikers before smartphones, powered on despite a low battery. The screen revealed a directory of stored images, and what they contained would shock the investigators. The photographs documented Chloe and Sarah Blake at various stages of captivity. Some showed them tied to trees, faces gaunt and streaked with dirt. Others showed them sitting exhausted on the forest floor, bound and helpless. The images were not sexual, but they were chilling, methodical documentation of two human beings reduced to specimens. Metadata timestamps allowed the team to reconstruct a timeline from September 14th, the day after the sisters disappeared, to early December, just days before their rescue. Every photo confirmed the sisters' testimony, but what kind of person would methodically record such suffering? The evidence confirmed Victor Kane had held them captive for months, yet he was not at the campsite when investigators arrived. The sleeping bag was cold, and no fresh tracks indicated his current presence. Kane had been there recently, perhaps within the last day or two, but vanished before the search team could reach him. A perimeter was established around the site, and more units were called to expand the search. Helicopters scanned ridges, and ground teams fanned out. Snow made tracking easier visually, but slow and dangerous. Teams rotated in shifts, battling cold and exhaustion. This was the same forest that had hidden him from searchers for months, the same terrain he had used to control the sisters' every movement. By nightfall, Kane was still at large. Portable lights and thermal imaging equipment remained active. Then, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on December 28th, a thermal camera picked up a heat signature moving through the trees about half a mile east of the campsite. The operator immediately radioed the information. A team of 6 officers advanced cautiously toward the heat signature, using night vision goggles and hand signals to communicate. As they closed in, a tall, heavily built figure carrying a large pack emerged from the underbrush. Victor Kane was finally in sight. After months of evading capture, the predator had been located. But would he go quietly, or would the forest claim another victim? Every step forward was critical. The officers knew the next moments could determine whether justice would finally be served. The chase through the snow-covered forest ended with a man who had haunted 2 women for months. Finally in custody, the officers called out, identifying themselves as law enforcement, and ordered the figure to stop and show his hands. He froze briefly, then dropped his backpack and hushed. The chase was fast and dangerous. Fallen logs, rocks, and uneven ground tested both suspect and pursuers. The suspect moved with the ease of someone who knew the forest intimately, but the officers had coordination and numbers on their side. A younger deputy, Travis Morrow, maneuvered to intercept, cutting off the suspect's path. When he emerged into a small clearing, Morrow shouted again to stop. The man hesitated, hood partially obscuring his face, then slowly raised his hands and sank to his knees. Officers converged, weapons drawn, ordering him to lie flat. He complied without resistance. When they pulled back his hood and shone a flashlight on his face, it was unmistakable, Victor Kane. The thick beard, deep-set eyes, weathered complexion. Blank, emotionless. Exactly as Chloe and Sarah had described. Deputy Jerry arrived minutes later, relief and anger mixing in equal measure. This was the man who had tormented 2 innocent women for months, left them to endure the cold, and treated them as experimental subjects. Kane was read his rights and transported under heavy guard to the Skumania County Jail. During the ride, he said nothing, protested nothing, asked for no lawyer. He simply stared out the window at the dark forest passing by. Back at the campsite where he had eluded capture for months, the forensic team continued collecting evidence. Among the items found were notebooks filled with handwritten observations. These were not personal diaries, but methodical field notes. Kane recorded every detail about the sisters' physical condition, emotional responses, and endurance of deprivation. He documented how long they could go without food, how cold affected their bodies, and how their willpower diminished over time. Entries were clinical, detached, and chilling. One, dated November 21st, noted that Sarah had stopped speaking while Chloe had become delirious, talking to herself and hallucinating. To Kane, these were simply data points, evidence of an experiment, not human suffering. How could someone calculate pain and despair like numbers on a page? And what would the courts do with evidence this cold, this precise? Victor Kane was behind bars, but his notebooks held secrets that would shock even seasoned investigators. What else had he recorded? And what horrors might still emerge from his meticulous documentation? The evidence would soon guide the prosecution and uncover the full extent of Kane's crimes. But first, the investigation had to analyze every chilling detail in those notebooks. After months of terror, the man who had held 2 women captive was finally in custody, but the question no one could answer lingered. Why did he leave them alive? The notebooks, camera, maps, and all other items from the campsite were entered into evidence. The case against Victor Kane was airtight, yet one mystery remained. Why had he abandoned the sisters tied to that tree instead of finishing his plan? The answer would have to come from Kane himself. Victor Kane's first formal interrogation took place on the afternoon of December 28th at the Skumania County Jail. He had been in custody less than 24 hours, yet the weight of evidence against him was overwhelming. The camera, notebooks, campsite, and sisters' testimonies all pointed to a man who had carried out one of the most disturbing crimes in Pacific Northwest history. Deputy Lawrence Jerry led the questioning, with FBI Special Agent Mitchell Morgan present, a specialist in abduction and psychological manipulation. The session was recorded, the transcript to be used at trial. Kane sat across the table, hands cuffed, his expression as blank as when arrested. He had declined a lawyer, stating he had nothing to hide, a chilling remark given the mountain of evidence. Jerry began with the basics: identity, recent whereabouts. Kane responded in a flat, monotone voice. He confirmed his name as Victor Andrew Kane, his age is 57, and that he had spent the better part of the last decade living in Mount Iron National Forest. Towns and cities, he said, were unpredictable and annoying. The forest, by contrast, made sense. It had rules, it had order. How does someone find comfort in the wild, while others are suffering under their control? What could possibly justify such cold detachment? The interrogation would soon reveal the twisted logic behind Kane's actions, and the terrifying mindset of a man who treated human lives like experiments. What he said next would shock the investigators and shed light on the final haunting decision to leave the sisters alive. The interrogation finally uncovered Kane's motive, and it was more chilling than anyone had imagined. When asked about Chloe and Sarah Blake, Kane did not deny knowing them. He confirmed he had taken them on the night of September 13th, and described the abduction in the same clinical, detached manner as his notebook entries. He admitted to observing their campsite for hours, waiting until he was certain they were asleep. He explained using a flashlight to disorient them and zip ties to restrain them because it was efficient and minimized the risk of injury. Jerry pressed for the reason. Kane paused, tilted his head, and finally said, "I wanted to see what would happen." Agent Morgan followed up. What did he mean? Kane's answer was disturbingly simple. He was curious about human endurance, how long a person could survive under extreme conditions without food, water, or comfort. Books and documentaries were not enough. He wanted first-hand data. He described Chloe and Sarah not as people, but as subjects in an experiment. Every variable had been controlled: nutrition, hydration, temperature, exposure, psychological stress. He documented it meticulously because understanding the results required complete observation. When Jerry asked if he understood that his actions were wrong, Kane's response was chilling. He acknowledged society would see it as wrong, but insisted he did not. To him, suffering was natural, a part of existence, no different from the trials animals face in the wild. He likened himself to a scientist observing behavior in the natural world, interfering only as necessary for the experiment. The detectives exchanged uneasy glances. They had encountered dangerous criminals before, but Kane was different. No anger, no remorse, no moral justification, just cold, clinical detachment. To him, the sisters were objects, and their suffering was data. How can a mind view human beings as nothing more than subjects? Could anyone survive being seen only as a number, not a person? The interrogation was far from over. Kane had revealed his motive, but what he would say next might explain why he ultimately let the sisters live. Stay with this story. because the final revelations from Kane would shock even the most seasoned investigators. The detectives asked the question that had haunted them since the sisters were found: why leave them alive? Agent Morgan shifted the line of questioning. She asked Kane why he had abandoned Chloe and Sarah at the tree instead of continuing his experiment, or disposing of them entirely. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He paused, staring at the corner of the room, and finally said the experiment had reached its conclusion. By early December, both women had deteriorated to the point where he believed they would not survive much longer. Their bodies were shutting down. Responses to stimuli were minimal. He had collected all the data he needed. He admitted he had considered ending their lives to complete the study, but decided against it. When pressed why, he said he was not interested in death itself, only the process leading up to it. Once that process was complete, the subjects no longer held value to him, so he tied them securely to the tree. He ensured they could not escape. He left. He assumed they would die within a day or two. Their bodies would eventually be found. He did not anticipate they would be discovered alive. That outcome, he said, had surprised him. Jerry asked if he felt anything when he learned the sisters had survived. Kane shook his head. Curiosity, perhaps, he admitted, but nothing else. No guilt, no satisfaction, no relief. The session continued for hours. Kane calmly described the locations where he held the sisters. He described the methods he used to avoid detection. He described the timeline of the months-long ordeal. He answered every question as though it were an academic discussion rather than a criminal investigation. He showed no remorse. He showed no recognition of the suffering he had inflicted. By the end of the interrogation, it was clear Victor Kane occupied a mental S-gaze where human life had no intrinsic value. Suffering was data. His actions were justified by his own twisted intellectual curiosity. How can someone view living beings purely as subjects? Could such a mind ever feel empathy? Or is it irretrievably lost? With Kane in custody and the charges stacked high, the next step was the courtroom. But the trial would uncover even more shocking details about the months the sisters spent in captivity and what Kane truly planned all along. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Victor Kane would finally face the consequences of his crimes. The trial began in the spring at the United States District Court for the Western District of Idaho. Reporters, legal analysts, and members of the public packed the courtroom. All were eager to witness the outcome of a case that had gripped the nation. Chloe and Sarah Blake delivered powerful testimony. They recounted the 3 months they had endured in captivity. Their words painted a vivid picture of suffering, the unrelenting pain of being restrained, the terror of complete isolation, and the hopelessness of thinking they might die in the forest. Yet, amid the despair, they described the bond that kept them alive: quiet encouragement, small acts of care, and the unyielding determination to survive together. The prosecution presented damning evidence: photographs from Kane's camera, meticulous notes documenting their physical and emotional decline, forensic analysis from both the forest sites. Medical experts explained the extreme nature of their injuries. They explained the improbability of survival. They explained the lasting psychological trauma caused by prolonged captivity. The defense argued that Kane suffered from a severe mental disorder. They claimed it impaired his understanding of right and wrong. A psychiatrist described him as showing traits of antisocial personality disorder and possible schizoid tendencies. The prosecution countered with evidence of Kane's careful planning, methodical movement through the forest, and deliberate avoidance of detection. These were clear signs he fully understood his actions were criminal. After less than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict on April 5th, guilty on every count. A wave of relief passed through the courtroom. Chloe and Sarah embraced, tears streaming. Their mother held them close. What does it take to survive both the cruelty of another person and the long journey back to life? Though justice had been served, the sisters' recovery was just beginning, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Could they ever fully reclaim the lives that had been stolen from them? The final chapter of Victor Kane's crimes was about to be written. Justice would be unflinching and absolute. 2 weeks after the verdict, sentencing was held before Honorable Thomas Langford, a seasoned federal judge. In his statement, he remarked that in decades on the bench, he had never seen a case that so vividly exposed the depths of human cruelty. Kane had reduced 2 women to objects, forcing them to endure suffering for nothing more than his own twisted curiosity. The judge declared that the only fitting resolution was to prevent him from ever harming another person. Victor Kane received 6 life sentences without parole, 1 for each count, to be served consecutively. He showed no visible emotion. He merely nodded once as the sentence was read. He was escorted from the courtroom by federal marshals. After surviving such horror, how do you begin to rebuild a life that was stolen? In the months that followed, Chloe and Sarah Blake embarked on a difficult recovery. Intensive physical therapy helped them regain strength and mobility after months of restraint. Trauma counseling addressed the emotional scars left by their ordeal. Their mother, Elizabeth, became an advocate for missing persons and wilderness safety. She collaborated with the National Park Service to enhance search procedures and communication systems. She also founded a nonprofit in her daughters' names to support survivors of abduction and violent crimes. Chloe returned to her work as a graphic designer. She avoided isolated locations. Sarah eventually went back to teaching. She found purpose in her students, and in focusing on life beyond her trauma, both sisters spoke publicly about their experience, not to dwell on the past, but to raise awareness, inspire resilience, and show the power of community in supporting survivors. Even with justice served, their story was far from over. The scars of their captivity would remain, but so would their strength. The lessons they shared would ripple far beyond the forest where it all began. Even after the nightmare ended, the story of Chloe and Sarah Blake continued to teach, warn, and inspire. Their case became a touchstone for law enforcement nationwide. It was cited in training programs as a chilling example of how quickly a routine outing can turn into a life-threatening situation. It also showed how critical it is to maintain search efforts, even when hope seems lost. The sisters' survival after months of captivity was credited to their resilience, the chance discovery by a wildlife biologist, and the painstaking work of investigators who followed every lead. Victor Kane remains behind bars in a federal maximum security prison. He spends his days in isolation. He has never expressed remorse. He dedicates his time to reading scientific journals and writing in confiscated notebooks. He has made no attempt to contact the Blake family. They have firmly rejected any communication. How do ordinary people survive the unimaginable and emerge stronger? The forest itself has returned to silence. It is indifferent to what occurred beneath its canopy. The Douglas fir where the sisters were found still stands. It is a quiet sentinel to their ordeal. Hikers pass by, unaware of the terror that unfolded there. For those who know the story, the tree is a testament to human endurance and the power of hope. Chloe and Sarah survived because they refused to surrender. They survived because they clung to each other. They survived because even in the cold, merciless wilderness, a fragment of hope remained alive. In the end, that spark of hope and the will to survive was enough to turn a story of darkness into one of courage.